My name is Megan Ellery, I'm 33 years old, and 11 weeks ago I found out my entire family was going to Italy without me because my cousin posted a countdown clock on Instagram. 47 days. That's what the caption said. 47 days till Amalfi. Can't wait to celebrate grandma and grandpa, I mean mom and dad, 40 years married. My cousin Brianna typed that at 11 at night, tagged 9 people, hearts and plain emojis all over it, and never once thought about who might scroll past it at midnight, unable to sleep, doing exactly what she was doing, killing time on her phone. I counted the tags twice. My mother Diane, my father Robert, my sister Kayla, my brother-in-law Trevor, their 2 kids, my Aunt Carol, 2 cousins, 9 names, not mine. I want to tell you that I laughed it off. That I thought, okay, maybe it's a small trip, maybe there's a logistics reason, maybe I'm reading too much into a photo caption written by a 24-year-old at midnight. That's what I told myself for about 6 minutes. Then I opened our family group chat, the one called Ellery Fam, the one I'd been in since my dad first figured out how group texts worked, and I scrolled back 3 months. There it was. Buried under birthday wishes and a recipe for pot roast someone had shared twice. A message from my mother sent on a Tuesday afternoon in April. Talk to the travel agent, we're looking at the 2nd week of September for Italy. I'll get the spreadsheet together for everyone coming. Everyone coming, I read that phrase probably 15 times. Everyone coming. I wasn't in a single message about flights. Not one about hotel rooms, not one about the itinerary, not one photo of anyone holding up a passport with a laughing emoji. For 3 months, my family had been planning a 10-day trip to Italy in a group chat that included me, and somehow not one word of it had been meant for my eyes. Here's a question for you while I get into this. Where are you watching from right now, and is it late where you are the way it was for me? Because I think that matters. I think what happened to me happened at 11:50 at night, in a kitchen with the light over the stove still on, and something about the quiet of it made the whole thing feel worse than it would have at noon. I want to be clear about something before I go further because I know how these stories can sound. I am not a perfect daughter. I've missed Christmases for work. I forgot my mother's birthday once, genuinely forgot, and felt sick about it for a week after. I am the practical one in my family, the one who reads contracts before signing them, the one who double-checks fine print, the one who, at family gatherings, ends up being asked to look over somebody's lease or explain what a lien is. I became a paralegal 11 years ago partly because I liked how documents don't lie. People lie, documents mostly don't. That belief was about to get tested in a way I never saw coming. Because this wasn't really about a trip. I understand that now. The trip was never the point. The trip was the surface of something much deeper, something that had been sitting underneath my family for over a year since my grandmother Alina died and left behind more than anyone in my family knew how to be honest about. But that night, all I knew was this. My parents were turning 40 years married, my whole family was going to celebrate it on the Amalfi Coast, and somebody had made absolutely sure my name never made it onto that list. I put my phone down on the counter and I remember thinking very calmly, almost too calmly, okay, let's find out why. I had no idea that why would take me through a forged signature, a family trust with my name legally attached to it, a notary public who owed my father a favor, and a courtroom I'd end up sitting in while my parents were somewhere over the Atlantic, completely unaware of what I was about to do. To understand how a person gets erased from her own family's group chat, you have to understand the family first. So let me back up. I grew up in Fairborn, a small city just outside Dayton, Ohio, the kind of place where everyone's parents knew each other from church or from the plant where half the town worked. My dad, Robert Ellery, spent 31 years as a machinist at a parts supplier before he retired at 60. My mom, Diane, worked the front desk at a pediatrician's office for almost as long. They are, by every outward measure, decent people. They raised 2 daughters, paid their bills on time, went to church on Christmas and Easter, and never once in my entire childhood gave me a reason to think they didn't love me. My sister Kayla is 4 years younger than me. Growing up, we were close in the specific way sisters are close when one of them is quietly used as a measuring stick for the other. I got good grades without much effort, which people like to point out in front of Kayla, which I now understand did neither of us any favors. Kayla struggled in school, got into some trouble as a teenager, nothing serious, mostly the kind of thing where you get caught skipping and grounded for a month, and I think somewhere in there, a story took root in our family. The story went, Megan is the responsible one, Kayla is the one who needs help. I didn't write that story. But I benefited from being called responsible for so long that I stopped noticing how much weight it put on me and how much resentment it might quietly plant in someone standing next to me being called the opposite. I went into paralegal work after a 2-year program, started at a small firm doing family law, and eventually landed at Hartwell & Voss, a mid-sized firm in Dayton that handles a lot of estate and probate work. I've been there 9 years now. I'm good at my job. I understand trusts, wills, probate court timelines, and how documents get authenticated, in a way most people never have to learn unless something forces them to. Kayla married Trevor Brooks when she was 24. Trevor works in construction, good years and lean years depending on how the housing market's doing, and lately it had been lean. They have 2 kids, Owen and Presley, 7 and 4. I love those kids. I babysit them more than people probably realize. I bought Owen his first bike. My grandmother, Eleanor Ellery, my dad's mother, was, until 14 months before all this happened, the anchor of our family. She lived in a modest house on Clearwater Lake in Michigan, about 2 hours from us, and every summer of my childhood involved at least 2 weeks up there. She taught me to fish off the dock. She taught me how to make her pierogi recipe, the one she never wrote down because she said recipes you have to write down are recipes you don't really know yet. Grandma Eleanor died of heart failure 14 months before the Amalfi trip got planned. She was 86. It wasn't sudden exactly. She'd been slowing down for 2 years, but it still hit all of us hard, my dad especially. He is her only child. His father, my grandfather, died when I was in middle school, so for the last 20 years or so, it had really just been Grandma Eleanor, holding a certain kind of family gravity that nobody quite replaces when they're gone. She left behind the lake house, which the family still owns jointly, and she left behind something else, something I hadn't thought much about until the Amalfi trip forced me to. About 6 years before she died, Grandma Eleanor had sat me down at her kitchen table, in front of her old roll-top desk, and told me she wanted me to be the trustee over a fund she was setting up. Not the whole estate, the lake house would go to my dad outright, but a separate account funded with money from selling some land she'd inherited from her own parents, meant, in her words, for the family when the family actually needs it, not when somebody just wants it. She didn't want my dad managing it, she told me gently, because she loved him, but she knew he'd hand money to Kayla the second Kayla asked, no questions, the way he always had. She wanted somebody who'd ask questions. She trusted me to be the one who'd ask questions. I didn't love the position it put me in. I told her that. I said, Grandma, this is going to make Kayla feel some kind of way. She just patted my hand and said, Kayla will feel however she feels. You do right by this family, and that's the only job you have. That fund sat at just over $200,000 by the time she passed. I was the sole trustee. My parents and Kayla knew it existed. Grandma had told them herself before she died, sitting all of us down together, but I don't think any of them ever really sat with what that meant. Until apparently somebody needed $18,500 of it to help pay for a trip to Italy. The night I found that countdown post, I didn't call anyone. It was almost midnight, and some part of me, the part that spends her workdays being careful with documents before she draws conclusions from them, told me to wait until morning, to gather more before I said anything to anybody. So the next day on my lunch break I texted my mother, kept it light. Saw Brianna's countdown post, you guys doing a big trip for the anniversary, sounds fun. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally. Oh, it's nothing major, just a small family thing, don't want to make a big deal out of it. Small family thing. 9 people, 10 days on the Amalfi Coast is not most families' definition of small, but I let it sit. I said, that's exciting, when do you leave? September, she wrote back, we're still finalizing details. She didn't ask if I wanted to come, she didn't mention dates, she didn't say the word Italy. I sat there at my desk with my sandwich half-eaten and felt something cold settle into my stomach. The specific coldness of realizing someone is choosing their words very carefully in front of you. That evening I did something I'm not proud of, but I don't regret it either. My mother has used the same email address for 20 years, one she set up back when AOL was still a thing everybody had. And years ago, when she was setting up a family photo sharing folder, she'd added my old personal email, an account I still check sometimes, mostly for coupons, to a shared Google Drive folder called Ellery Family 2026. I'd forgotten it even existed. I opened it that night mostly out of curiosity, not expecting anything. The folder had 6 files in it. One was old Thanksgiving photos, one was a recipe document, and one, updated 4 days earlier, was titled Italy Trip, Itinerary and Costs Final. I want to tell you I hesitated before opening it. I didn't. I clicked and I read every line twice. 11 travelers, my parents. Kayla, Trevor, Owen, Presley, my Aunt Carol, my dad's sister and her husband, 2 cousins, Brianna and her brother Dylan, flights out of Dayton to Rome connecting to Naples, 10 nights in a rented villa outside Positano, a private boat tour of the coast on day 6, a dinner reservation at a restaurant with a name I recognized from a travel show, the kind of place where you book 6 weeks out. At the bottom, a cost breakdown. Flights, $9,200 total. Villa rental, $14,000. Excursions and dining, $6,800. And then a line that made my stomach actually drop, not metaphorically. I felt it physically, a lurch like missing a stair. Trust disbursement approved, $18,500. I read it 4 times. Trust disbursement approved. Approved by whom? I was the sole trustee on that account. Nobody had approved anything with me. Nobody had even mentioned the trust to me since the reading of Grandma's will 14 months earlier. I closed my laptop and sat in the dark for a long time. Then I opened my banking app, the one linked to the trust account, the one that sends me a statement every month that, if I'm honest, I usually skim rather than read closely, because for 14 months nothing had ever moved in that account except small interest accrual. I pulled up the most recent statement, and there it was, dated 3 weeks before my cousin's countdown post. A withdrawal, $18,500. Description: disbursement per authorization on file. I had authorized nothing. I called the trust company the next morning before I'd even had coffee. My hands were actually shaking, which surprised me because I don't shake. I'm the calm one. I'm the one who reads the fine print while everyone else is panicking. But there is a specific kind of fear that comes from realizing something with your name on it has been used without you, and it doesn't care how calm you normally are. The representative, a man named Curtis, patient, professional, pulled up the account and confirmed the withdrawal. It came through with a notarized letter of authorization, he told me. Signed by you, dated the 14th. We can send you a copy for your records. Please do, I said, because I didn't sign that. There was a pause on his end, the kind of pause where you can hear someone deciding how seriously to take a claim like that. I'll flag the account and get you that document right away, Miss Ellery. The PDF came through 20 minutes later. I sat at my kitchen table and stared at it. It was a 1-page letter on the trust company's own template, the kind you can request from any bank, authorizing a disbursement of $18,500 from the Alina R. Ellery Family Trust for family travel and reunion expenses. At the bottom, a signature line, my name typed, and above it a signature. It looked like mine. That's the thing that scared me most. Whoever had signed this had clearly seen my actual signature before, probably off an old document, a birthday card, a lease I'd once signed in front of them, and had done a reasonable job of approximating the loop of the M, the way I cross my T's fast and low. It would have fooled a bank teller glancing at it for 3 seconds. It did not fool me. My real signature has a small hook at the end of the Y in Ellery, something I've done since I was a teenager, and it's never once looked like this version. Below the signature was a notary seal. Gary Prout, Notary Public, State of Ohio, commission number, expiration date. I knew that name. Gary Prout owned a small insurance office 2 towns over, and I knew him because my dad had helped him, years back, fix a transmission on his work truck for free when Gary was struggling to keep his business afloat during a slow winter. My dad doesn't forget favors, and he doesn't forget owing them either. I filed that detail away without fully understanding yet how important it was going to become. I sat there with that document for a long time. Then I did the thing that, looking back, was probably the single most important decision I made in this entire story. I didn't call my mother, I didn't call my father, I didn't call Kayla, I called my friend Priya. Priya Nair is an estate attorney, 36, sharp as anything, someone I'd worked alongside on probate filings for 6 years before she left to open her own small practice. We'd gotten close over the kind of shared dark humor that develops when you spend your career around wills and death and grieving families. You either develop that humor or you burn out, and Priya and I had both chosen humor. I told her everything, the countdown post, the group chat, the spreadsheet, the trust disbursement, the signature that wasn't mine. She was quiet for a second when I finished. Then she said, okay. First, I'm sorry, that's an awful thing to find out over a cousin's Instagram story. Second, do not confront anyone yet, not your mom, not your sister, nobody. The second you tip them off, documents get lost, stories get straightened out, and you lose your advantage. Send me everything you have. Screenshots, the itinerary file, the bank statement, the authorization letter. I want to look at this properly before you say one word to your family. I remember feeling in that moment a strange mix of relief and dread. Relief because I finally had someone in my corner who understood documents the way I did, who wasn't going to tell me I was overreacting. Dread because some part of me, the daughter part, not the paralegal part, still wanted this to have an innocent explanation. I wanted Priya to look at everything and say, oh, this is just a misunderstanding, somebody probably forgot to loop you in, that's all. That is not what she said. Priya called me back 2 days later and I could tell from her voice before she even said anything that it was worse than I'd let myself imagine. Okay, she said. A few things. First, the notarized authorization. I had a document examiner I work with take a quick look at the signature. Not a full forensic report that costs real money and takes weeks, but a preliminary read. She says the pen pressure and formation are inconsistent with natural signing, meaning it looks traced or closely copied from a reference, not signed freehand. That's consistent with what you're telling me. Okay, I said. What else? The itinerary document, the one from the Google Drive folder. You said it was a Google Doc? Yeah. Did you check the version history? I hadn't. I didn't even know, honestly, that most people don't think to check that a shared Google Doc keeps a running log of every edit, timestamped, attributed to whichever Google account made it. Priya walked me through it over the phone while I pulled the document back up. I clicked See Version History. A sidebar opened up along the right side of the screen, a long list of timestamps going back 4 months, each one showing a name. Most of the edits were from my mother's account, adding line items, updating costs. But scattered through it, probably a dozen edits over 4 months, was another name, Kayla Brooks. She'd added the excursion line for the boat tour. She'd adjusted the villa cost after apparently negotiating a discount. And 3 weeks before Brianna's countdown post, the same week as the trust withdrawal, she had added the line. Trust disbursement approved, $18,500. I stared at that timestamp for a long time. Kayla had typed that line into a shared document. Kayla, who is not the trustee. Kayla, who would have had to know, at minimum, that money was coming out of that account, whether or not she was the one who'd actually forged the letter. There's more, Priya said, and I remember bracing myself because her tone had shifted into something almost apologetic. I asked you to send me the PDF of the notarized letter as an attachment, not a screenshot, so I could check the file metadata. Every PDF carries information about how it was created, what software made it, and sometimes who last touched it depending on the program. And the metadata shows it was generated using a PDF editor called Smolpt, and the last modified by field lists an email address. It's not your mother's email, it's not your father's. I already knew somehow before she said it, but I made her say it anyway. It's Kayla's, Priya said. Kayla.Brooks87, the same address that made those Google Doc edits. I put the phone down on the counter for a second and just breathed. Not because I was shocked, exactly. Some part of me had already been walking toward this conclusion since the moment I saw that spreadsheet line. But because there's a difference between suspecting your sister did something and having a document expert tell you plainly that the technical evidence points directly at her account. When I picked the phone back up, Priya was still talking, gently now. Megan, I want to say something and I want you to actually hear it, not just nod along. This doesn't necessarily mean Kayla forged the signature with her own hand. It's possible she had help, or someone else did the physical work and she just handled the digital side. It's also possible she acted completely alone. We don't know yet exactly how it happened, or whether your parents knew the letter itself was forged, versus just knowing money was being used and not asking too many questions about how it got authorized. People are very good at not asking questions when the answer benefits them. That distinction mattered to me more than I expected it to. I didn't want to walk into my parents' house and accuse them of forging a document. only to find out later that they genuinely believed Kayla had handled it with me, the way family members sometimes vaguely assume paperwork gets handled without asking exactly how. I wanted to know the truth before I said a single word out loud. "What do I do?" I asked her. "Two things," Priya said. "First, we report the notarization itself to the state notary licensing board. If Gary Prout notarized a signature without the actual signer present, which, if it's forged, he had to have, that's a serious violation, and it needs to be on the record independent of whatever happens with your family. Second, and more urgent, we petition the probate court for an emergency order freezing the remaining trust funds, pending investigation, so nobody touches what's left while we sort this out. I can have that filed within the week." "My parents leave for Italy in 5 weeks," I said. Priya was quiet for a second. "Then we need to move faster than 5 weeks. Before I go further, I want to tell you about the conversation I had with Gary Prout, because it's the moment this story stopped feeling like a family misunderstanding and started feeling like something with real consequences. I didn't go see him to confront him. Priya specifically told me not to, because anything I said outside of a formal complaint could complicate the investigation. But 4 days after Priya filed the notary complaint, Gary called me. His voice on the phone was different than I remembered, higher, faster, a man clearly aware his livelihood was on the line. "Megan," he said, "I got a letter from the state board. I need to talk to you before this goes any further." I told him I couldn't discuss it. My attorney had advised me not to, but he kept talking anyway, the words tumbling out like he'd been holding them in for days. "Your dad came to me back in June," he said. "Told me Kayla needed a form notarized for a family trust thing, said you were swamped with work and had already signed it and just needed it stamped official. I've known your family 20 years, Megan. Your dad fixed my truck for free back when I couldn't afford the shop rate. I didn't think twice. I should have asked you to come in yourself. I know that now. I'm not trying to make excuses. I need you to know I didn't think I was doing anything wrong." I didn't say much back to him. I couldn't honestly, not without violating what Priya had told me. But I hung up that phone and sat with one sentence rattling around in my skull. Your dad came to me, not Kayla alone. My father had personally walked a forged authorization letter into Gary Prout's office and vouched for it. Whether or not my father knew specifically that the signature on the page wasn't real, whether he genuinely believed Kayla when she told him I'd already signed it, or whether he knew exactly what was happening and simply didn't ask, my father had participated. Actively, not just by looking away. I sat with that for 2 days before I told Priya. When I finally did, she didn't seem surprised. "Forged documents almost never happen with just one person," she said. "Somebody signs, somebody notarizes, somebody vouches, somebody benefits, and usually somebody looks the other way. It's rarely a lone actor. I know that's hard to hear about your dad." It was hard to hear. I want to be honest with you about that because I think it's easy in stories like this to make one villain and let everybody else off easy. My father is not a cruel man. I believe to this day that some part of him told himself a story where this was harmless, where I'd have said yes if they'd asked, where borrowing from the family trust for a family trip wasn't really so different, where the forged signature was just a shortcut around an assumed yes rather than a real deception. I think people build those little rationalizations brick by brick, and by the time they've walked a forged form into a notary's office, they've usually stopped noticing the wall they've built. That doesn't make it okay. But it made it human, and somehow the human version was harder to be angry at than a cartoon villain would have been. I need to tell you about Kayla's side of this too, or at least the version of it I eventually came to understand, because I don't think this story is honest if I paint her as simply cruel. Trevor's construction business had a brutal 18 months before all this. A big residential project he'd subcontracted on fell through when the developer ran into financing trouble, and Trevor went almost 5 months with barely any work. They fell behind on their mortgage, not catastrophically, but enough that they were juggling which bill got paid which month. Kayla had confided some of this to my mother, not to me. We'd drifted enough over the years that she wasn't in the habit of confiding in me about money. I found this out later through my mother in a conversation I'll get to, but I want to say it here because I think it matters. Kayla wasn't funding a lavish vacation out of simple greed. In her mind, and I'm reconstructing this, not excusing it, the math probably went something like this. Grandma's trust exists for the family when the family actually needs it. Trevor and I need it right now. Megan's fine, Megan doesn't need it, Megan's got her steady paralegal job and no kids and no mortgage trouble. If I ask Megan directly, she'll want paperwork and questions and maybe a no because that's who Megan is. But if the money just quietly helps pay for something the whole family is doing together, and Megan finds out afterward, she'll be upset for a minute, but it'll blow over the way things in families always blow over. I think Kayla told herself this wasn't stealing. I think she told herself it was borrowing against a future she assumed Grandma would have wanted her to have anyway. I think, underneath 11 years of being called the one who needs help, while I got called the responsible one, there was a resentment that had been quietly building long before any of this happened, and this was the moment it finally found an outlet. None of that makes it right. Forging a signature is forging a signature, whatever the reasoning behind it. But when I finally understood the full shape of why she did it, I found I couldn't hate her the way I thought I would. I was furious. I still am, in the parts of this that haven't healed yet. But furious and understanding turned out to be able to sit in the same chest at the same time, which was a more complicated feeling than I expected going into this. 5 weeks before my parents' flight to Rome, Priya filed an emergency petition in probate court asking for two things: an order freezing the remaining balance of the Aliner R. Ellery family trust, and a formal accounting requiring disclosure of exactly how the $18,500 disbursement had been authorized and by whom. I want to walk you through what that actually meant in practical terms, because I think people imagine legal action as something instant and dramatic, and it almost never is. Filing a petition means paperwork goes into a queue. A judge's clerk schedules a hearing date based on court availability, not based on how urgent your personal life feels. Priya filed on a Monday. The earliest hearing slot the court had available was 5.5 weeks out, a Thursday, at 10 in the morning. That Thursday happened to fall on day 4 of my parents' 10-day Italy trip. I remember doing the math on my kitchen calendar and feeling a strange, cold clarity settle over me. They would be somewhere on the Amalfi Coast, probably at that private boat tour they'd booked for day 6, or wandering some cobblestone street in position, while I sat in a Dayton probate courtroom asking a judge to freeze the account that had helped pay for their trip. There is a version of this story where I call my parents before that hearing, where I say, look, I know what happened, I know about the trust, I know about the forged letter, let's talk about this like adults before it becomes a court matter. I thought about doing that. I thought about it a lot, actually, lying awake more than one night turning it over. Priya talked me out of it, and I think she was right too. If you tip them off now, she said, there's a real chance somebody scrambles to fix something, pays back the money quietly, gets a new notarized letter drawn up after the fact to paper over the old one, coaches Gary on what to say. I know it feels cold to let them go on this trip without knowing what's coming. But the version of this where the truth actually comes out clean is the version where we let the process work the way it's supposed to. So I didn't call. I let my family fly to Italy on a Tuesday in September, my mother posting a photo from the airport gate. A photo I noticed that included everyone except me, captioned Ellery Family Adventure Begins. And I said nothing. I want to tell you that felt satisfying, some kind of quiet vindication. It didn't. It felt like grief. I sat in my apartment that Tuesday night and cried in a way I hadn't let myself cry through any of the discovery, the forged signature, the metadata, any of it. Because somewhere underneath the anger and the legal strategy, I was still a daughter who'd found out her whole family had learned to plan around her absence so smoothly that none of them had even needed to discuss it out loud. That kind of practiced exclusion doesn't happen by accident. It happens because, somewhere along the way, they'd all quietly agreed I was someone to be managed rather than included. The hearing was scheduled for 10 in the morning on a Thursday. I took the day off work. Technically, I could have gone in since Priya was the one arguing, but I couldn't imagine sitting at my desk pretending to review someone else's estate documents while this was happening. I got to the courthouse 40 minutes early. I sat on a wooden bench outside courtroom 4, watching other people shuffle past with their own folders of paperwork, their own private emergencies, and I thought about how many rooms like this exist in every city, quietly processing the moments when families come apart at their legal seams. Priya met me there at 9:30 in a gray suit, calm in the specific way she always got before something important, like she'd already run the whole hearing in her head a dozen times and simply needed her body to catch up to where her mind already was. "You don't have to say anything today," she reminded me. "This is a procedural hearing on the emergency petition. I'll present the evidence, the bank statement, the forged authorization, the metadata report, the notary complaint status. The judge will decide whether to grant the freeze and order a formal accounting. You're here as the petitioner, but you don't need to testify unless asked directly." The judge was a woman named Judge Acaffer, probably in her 50s, sharp reading glasses, the kind of unhurried authority that comes from having sat through thousands of these hearings before. She reviewed the petition, asked Priya 2 clarifying questions about the chain of custody on the PDF metadata report, and asked whether the trust company representative, Curtis, had been notified, which he had, by phone the previous day, and had confirmed via email that the trust company had no objection to a freeze pending investigation. It took, in total, maybe 25 minutes. Judge Acaffer granted the emergency freeze on the remaining trust balance, effective immediately, and ordered a formal accounting within 30 days requiring documentation of exactly how and by whom the $18,500 disbursement had been authorized, with a follow-up hearing scheduled for 6 weeks out. I remember sitting there as she read the order, feeling something settle in my chest that I can only describe as the first real exhale I'd taken in 5 weeks. It wasn't over. It wasn't justice, exactly, not yet. But it was real, on the record, undeniable in a way that no family conversation could talk its way around later. While all of this was happening, the courthouse, the 25 minutes, the order, my family was roughly 6,000 miles away, 4 days into a 10-day trip, almost certainly at that moment boarding a private boat for the Amalfi Coast excursion they'd booked back in April. That's the where I actually went of it, if you're wondering about the title of this story. While they were on a boat off the coast of Italy, celebrating 40 years of marriage with money that included $18,500 taken from a trust I alone was legally responsible for protecting, I was sitting on a hard bench in a Dayton courthouse, watching a judge freeze what was left of it. I didn't feel triumphant walking out of that courthouse. I felt tired and sad and strangely proud of myself all at the same time, in a combination I hadn't expected. The freeze order took effect immediately, but the trust company had 30 days to formally notify all relevant parties in writing, which meant, in theory, my parents wouldn't necessarily hear about it right away through official channels. But banks talk to people faster than court paperwork moves sometimes, especially when a linked card gets flagged. Here's what I didn't fully think through until after the fact. My parents had arranged, before leaving, to extend their trip by 3 additional days. A side excursion to Rome they'd added late, funded partly by pulling a small additional amount from the same trust account through a linked debit card Kayla had apparently set up months earlier, one I hadn't even known existed until Curtis mentioned it during our first call. 3 days into their trip, that card got declined at a hotel front desk in Rome, where they'd gone to book the extension. My mother called Curtis's direct line, the same one I'd called first, in a state, according to what he later told me, of genuine confusion, saying there must be some kind of error, the account had plenty of funds in it. Curtis, bound by the freeze order and by his own professional obligations, told her there was a court-ordered freeze in place pending an investigation into the authorization of a prior disbursement, and that no further transactions could be processed until the matter was resolved by the court. My mother called me that same night, actually the middle of the night for me given the time difference. I let it go to voicemail. I listened to it the next morning, sitting at my kitchen table with coffee I didn't drink. Her voice was tight, controlled in the way she gets when she's trying very hard not to sound as upset as she is. "Megan, it's Mom. I need you to call me back. There's something wrong with the trust account. The bank is saying something about a court order, and I don't understand what's happening. Please call me back as soon as you get this." I didn't call back right away. I sat with that voicemail for most of the day, and then I called Priya instead. "You don't owe her an immediate explanation," Priya said. "You're allowed to respond on your own timeline. But if you do talk to her, I'd stick to what's factual and let the accounting order speak for the rest. You don't need to relitigate the whole thing over the phone while she's standing in a hotel lobby in Rome." I called my mother back that evening, once I'd steadied myself. I kept it short. I told her, yes, there was a court order freezing the trust account, that it had been filed because $18,500 had been withdrawn using a notarized authorization letter with a signature that was not mine, and that the court had ordered a formal accounting to determine exactly what had happened and who was responsible. There was a long silence on the line, long enough that I said, "Mom, are you there?" "I don't understand," she finally said. "Kayla told me you knew. She told me you'd agreed to it, that you were just too busy with work to deal with the actual signing, so she'd handle the paperwork." I felt something in my chest crack a little hearing that, because I believed her. I believed that my mother had genuinely been told that story and had genuinely believed it, at least enough to not ask harder questions. It didn't excuse the not asking, but it told me something important about how this whole thing had actually spread through my family, not as one big conscious conspiracy, but as a story Kayla told, that my father acted on with Gary Pruitt, that my mother simply absorbed without pressing too hard, because it was easier and more convenient to believe a version where nobody had done anything wrong. "I never agreed to anything," I told her. "I never even knew about the trip until I saw Brianna's Instagram post. I wasn't in a single conversation about it. Not one." The silence that followed that sentence was the longest one of the entire call. The court-ordered accounting came together over the following month, and it laid out, in plain administrative language, exactly what had happened. Kayla had approached Gary Pruitt in June with a document she'd created herself, using a template she'd found online for trust disbursement authorizations, listing herself as having prepared it on behalf of me. She'd signed my name to it, having practiced the signature using an old lease document I'd once left at my parents' house years ago during a move. My father had accompanied her to Gary's office and told him I'd already signed it and simply needed it notarized, since I was buried at work. Which, to be fair, I often genuinely am, which is probably exactly why that particular lie was so easy for people to believe. Gary Pruitt notarized the document without requiring me to appear in person, which is a clear violation of Ohio notary law. A notary is legally required to witness the actual signing, or at minimum personally verify the identity of the signer through acceptable ID, neither of which happened. He submitted his response to the state licensing board acknowledging the violation, citing his long relationship with my father as the reason he hadn't followed proper procedure, and his notary commission was suspended pending a formal review, with a hearing scheduled that could result in permanent revocation. The accounting confirmed what Priya's document examiner had suspected. The signature showed clear signs of tracing rather than natural signing, consistent with someone copying a reference signature rather than genuinely signing their own name. At the follow-up hearing, 6 weeks after the emergency freeze, Judge Acaffer ordered that the $18,500 be repaid to the trust, with a repayment plan to be worked out among the family, given that the money had already been spent on non-refundable trip expenses. She also ordered that going forward, any disbursement from the trust required a co-signature not just from me, but from a second, independent party, which Priya and I agreed should be Priya's own firm, acting as an oversight trustee, specifically to prevent this kind of situation from happening again. I remember sitting in that second hearing, listening to the repayment terms get laid out, 18 months, monthly installments, split between my parents and Kayla and Trevor according to a formula the judge worked out based on each party's role and financial circumstances, and feeling something other than triumph. I felt exhausted. Grief has a way of running out the other side of anger, and by that second hearing I was mostly just tired and sad and ready for this to be a chapter that had ended rather than one that kept unfolding. About 4 months after that second hearing, my father called and asked if I'd meet him at the lake house. Just the two of us. I almost said no. I'd seen my parents twice since Italy, both times stiff, careful conversations at family gatherings I couldn't fully avoid without making things worse for Owen and Presley, who didn't deserve to lose an aunt over any of this. But I hadn't had a real conversation with either of my parents since that phone call to Rome. I drove up on a Saturday in late January, the lake mostly frozen over, the dock where Grandma Alina taught me to fish covered in a thin crust of snow. My dad was sitting on the porch in his coat when I pulled in like he'd been waiting there a while. We didn't hug. We sat on the porch steps, both of us looking out at the frozen lake instead of at each other, which somehow made it easier to talk. "I've been trying to figure out how to say this for months," he said. "I keep starting the sentence in my head and it keeps coming out sounding like an excuse, so I'm just going to say the true thing plainly and let it sound however it sounds. I walked into Gary's office because Kayla told me you'd already agreed, and some part of me wanted to believe her because it was easier than asking you directly and maybe hearing a no. I think I've spent years assuming you'd always be fine, always be steady, always be the one who didn't need anything, and somewhere in there I stopped actually checking whether that was true or whether I just needed it to be true. I didn't say anything for a while. The wind moved across the frozen lake and somewhere far off a dog was barking. You should have asked me, I finally said. Not Kayla, not Gary, me. I would have said yes to helping with something, Dad. I've helped Kayla plenty of times over the years, you know that. What I couldn't forgive was finding out my name had been forged onto a document, and that you walked it into a notary's office knowing, or at least strongly suspecting, that I hadn't actually signed anything. I know, he said. His voice cracked slightly on those two words, which I hadn't expected. My father is not a man who cries easily, and he didn't fully cry then either, but it was close. I know that now. I told myself a story that made it okay, and it wasn't okay, and I'm sorry. I want to tell you that conversation fixed everything. It didn't. But it was real, and it was the first honest thing either of us had said to the other since the whole thing started. And sometimes that has to be enough to build back on, one honest conversation at a time, rather than expecting a single moment to undo a year of accumulated dishonesty. It's been just over a year since Brianna's Instagram countdown post. Here's where things actually stand, without any tidy bow on it, because real life mostly doesn't offer tidy bows. The $18,500 has been repaid to the trust in full, the last installment coming in 3 months ago. Gary Pruitt's notary commission was permanently revoked after his board hearing. He still runs his insurance office, but he can no longer notarize documents, and I understand from mutual acquaintances that it's cost him some business. I don't take satisfaction in that exactly, but I don't feel guilty about it either. Rules like that exist for a reason, and he broke one that has real consequences when it fails. Priya's firm remains the co-signing oversight trustee on Grandma Aliner's fund, which means any future disbursement requires both of us independently to review and approve it. It's slower than it used to be. It's also, I think, exactly the kind of check that fund needed all along, even before any of this happened, and I regret that it took a forged signature for any of us to realize that. My relationship with Kayla is the hardest part of this to describe honestly. We talk. We're civil at family gatherings. I still see Owen and Presley regularly. I refuse to let this cost them a relationship with their aunt, whatever else it's cost the adults involved. But something between Kayla and me hasn't come back, not yet, and I'm not sure it will the way it was before or whether it should. She apologized to me once in a message about 6 weeks after the second hearing, a message that talked mostly about how much pressure she and Trevor had been under, and only briefly, almost as an afterthought, about what she'd actually done. I accepted the apology as far as it went. I haven't fully closed the distance it left behind, and I've stopped pretending to myself that I need to rush that. My mother and I have found something closer to our old rhythm, slowly, through a handful of long phone calls over the past year. Hers mostly consisting of trying to understand how she'd absorbed Kayla's version of events so easily, without pressing harder for the truth. I think my mother has always found it easier to believe the story that keeps the peace rather than the one that's actually true, and I think that's a pattern older than this one incident, one I've decided isn't entirely mine to fix for her. My father and I are, I'd say, closer now than we were before any of this happened, strange as that sounds. That conversation on the porch cracked something open in him that I don't think would have cracked otherwise, and he's been different since, quieter in the specific way of someone actually sitting with a mistake instead of talking around it. Last month I drove up to the lake house alone, on a Saturday close to the anniversary of Grandma Aliner's death. I sat on the same dock where she taught me to fish 30 years ago, in a coat too thin for how cold it actually was, and I thought about the version of this story where I'd never checked that old email account, never opened that shared folder, never noticed the version history on a Google Doc. In that version, my family goes to Italy, the trip becomes a warm memory everyone reminisces about at future holidays, and I quietly become the sister who was too busy with work to come along. A small, sad footnote nobody examines too closely, filed away next to all the other small exclusions that happen in families that have quietly decided one member doesn't need to be asked about things anymore. I think about how easy it would have been for that version to become the only version. How close I came to just letting the discomfort of that countdown post pass, telling myself I was reading too much into a caption, the way I almost did in the first 6 minutes after I saw it. I don't think this story ends with a clean villain getting destroyed and a hero riding off satisfied. Gary lost something that mattered to him. Kayla is still working through debt, and whatever resentment sits underneath all of this that I may never fully understand. My parents are older now than they were a year ago, and I think this cost them something too, not just money, but a version of themselves they'd have preferred to keep believing in. What I got in the end wasn't revenge exactly, whatever this video's title might suggest. What I got was the truth, documented, undeniable, on the record in a way no family conversation could talk its way around later. And what I learned, sitting on that frozen dock last month, is that being the responsible one in a family isn't actually a compliment. It's a role people assign you because it's convenient for them, and sometimes the most important thing you can do with that role is refuse to let it mean you can be quietly written out of your own family's plans. I don't know exactly what Grandma Alina would think of everything that happened with her trust, but I think she'd have appreciated that I asked the questions she trusted me to ask. That's the only job you have, she told me once. I think in the end I did it. This story is a work of fiction created for entertainment and reflection. Any resemblance to real people or events is coincidental. If it made you think about the difference between keeping the peace and telling the truth in your own family, that's the point. Sometimes the two aren't the same thing, and it's worth knowing which one you're actually choosing.